Night had fallen heavily over the small town, bringing with it a storm that seemed determined not to let up. Thunder rumbled across the horizon and lightning flashed intermittently, casting grotesque shadows on the walls of the basement where Lucas was seated. He was a dedicated high school student, somewhat solitary, finding solace in the finished basement of his home as the perfect refuge for his studies. The basement had been renovated a few years ago, transformed from a damp and dark space into a comfortable and well-lit area, with vintage furniture and shelves filled with dusty books. Lucas always enjoyed being there, away from the noise and distractions of the rest of the house. He was focused on his homework, the pencil tip scratching the paper while the storm roared outside. The dim light from the ceiling lamp flickered slightly with each thunderclap, creating a dance of light and shadow across the walls. Lucas felt slightly uneasy, but attributed it to the weather. After all, who wouldn't feel a bit nervous in such a storm? He adjusted himself in the chair, trying to ignore the creeping cold slowly seeping from the basement floor. Suddenly, amidst a particularly loud clap of thunder, he heard it. It was a subtle sound, almost swallowed by the storm's noise, but unmistakable. It was the voice of his younger brother, Reese, calling him to come upstairs. "Lucas, come here." The voice sounded distant, as if from the top of the stairs. He frowned, confused. Reese and his dad had gone to visit their grandmother that afternoon and weren't supposed to be back yet. Lucas paused for a moment, trying to decide if he had really heard the voice, or if it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. The thunder roared again, and a chill ran down his spine. Deciding it was better to check, he got up, the sound of the chair scraping the floor echoing through the basement. As he climbed the stairs, each step felt heavier than the last. The house was eerily quiet, except for the sound of rain beating against the windows. At the top of the stairs, Lucas looked around. The living room was empty, dark, and a sense of unease began to settle in his chest. He called out for Reese, but there was no response. Only the echo of his own voice returned to him. The silence was oppressive, almost palpable. Lucas felt that something was wrong, terribly wrong. But what? He didn't know. All he knew was that Reese's voice, calling him in that way, didn't make sense. And it was just the beginning of a night he would never forget. The storm outside seemed to grow in intensity, mirroring Lucas's growing fear. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself, but an inexplicable uneasiness continued to pulse inside him. The house, once a safe haven, now seemed to hide secrets in the shadows. And Lucas, unknowingly, was about to discover that some calls should never be answered. Lucas stood still at the top of the stairs, straining to hear any other sound that might indicate his younger brother's presence. The silence was almost absolute, interrupted only by the occasional thunder and the persistent drumming of rain against the windows. He looked around the room, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. Then he heard it again. "Lucas, come here." Reese's voice sounded once more, this time more insistent, almost pleading. Lucas felt a shiver run down his spine. Something about the voice seemed off. It wasn't just the fact that Reese wasn't supposed to be home. There was a strange, almost metallic quality to the sound. Determined to find out what was going on, Lucas began to explore the house. Each step echoed through the empty hallways, amplifying his sense of isolation. He called out for Reese again, but received no answer. He passed through the kitchen, the living room, and the hallway leading to the bedrooms. Everything was deserted. With each room he checked, Lucas's anxiety grew. He opened Reese's bedroom door, expecting to find his brother there, perhaps hiding as part of a prank. But the room was empty, with toys scattered on the floor as usual, but no sign of life. The shadows seemed to stretch and move, following him closely as if watching his every move. Returning to the living room, Lucas tried to calm his nerves. Maybe he was imagining things. Maybe the storm was messing with his mind. But the sound of Reese's voice kept echoing in his head, insistent and impossible to ignore. "Lucas, please, come here." The voice sounded again, this time even closer, almost at the bottom of the stairs leading to the basement. Lucas felt his heart race. With trembling hands, he descended the stairs once more, each step heavier than the last. He reached the basement, illuminated only by the faint glow of the flickering lamp. He stood still, trying to find any sign of his brother. The silence was overwhelming. Then, suddenly, he noticed something that hadn't been there before. One of Reese's toys, a small red truck, was in the middle of the basement floor. Lucas knew he hadn't brought that toy to the basement. His breath quickened, and he bent down to pick up the truck, feeling the cold plastic in his hands. As he examined the toy, an unsettling thought began to form in his mind. What if it wasn't Reese calling him? What if it was something or someone trying to deceive him? Lucas felt a chill run down his spine and looked around, the darkness of the basement seeming more oppressive than ever. He stood up, clutching the truck like a protective amulet, and quickly ascended the stairs. The feeling of being watched didn't abandon him, and he could almost feel invisible eyes following his every move. At the top of the stairs, he stopped and looked back at the darkness enveloping the basement. Lucas knew that something strange was happening, something inexplicable and terrifying. And deep in his mind, he began to understand that this night was far from over. Lucas took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. With the little red truck still in his hands, he felt a wave of determination. If Reese's voice wasn't real, then he needed to find out what was happening. He refused to be haunted by something he didn't understand. He began to walk through the house again, this time more cautiously, analyzing every corner and shadow. He passed through the living room and kitchen, checking inside cabinets and behind curtains. The silence continued to be his only response, except for the occasional thunder that seemed to shake the entire house. Entering the hallway leading to the bedrooms, Lucas felt a change in the atmosphere. The air felt heavier, almost suffocating. He stopped in front of his parents' bedroom, the door slightly ajar, and pushed it open slowly. The room was dark, but he could make out the shapes of the furniture. Nothing seemed out of place. Turning around, he entered Reese's bedroom. The streetlights cast a faint glow through the window, creating long, distorted shadows. Lucas approached Reese's bed, his heart pounding hard. He knelt down and looked under the bed, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain the strange occurrences. But there was nothing there, just darkness and silence. He stood up and went to Reese's closet, opening the doors all at once. The clothes hung in order, the toys arranged on shelves. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but the feeling of being watched persisted. Lucas returned to the hallway, his now sweaty hands clutching Reese's toy tightly. He decided to check the last room he hadn't inspected yet, the bathroom. The door was ajar, and he pushed it gently. The reflection in the mirror looked distorted, like something was out of place, but the room was empty. Suddenly, a cold draft swept through the hallway, making Lucas shiver. He turned quickly, expecting to find someone there, but the hallway was empty. Only the darkness stared back at him. The unease was growing, transforming into palpable fear. He returned to the living room, the feeling of helplessness growing inside him. He sat on the sofa, the toy truck still in his hands, and tried to piece his thoughts together. The silence was almost deafening now, each second ticking by stretched endlessly. Then he heard it again. "Lucas, come here." This time, Reese's voice seemed to echo throughout the entire house, each word laden with a desperate tone. Lucas felt panic rising within him. He knew he needed to get out, but he also knew he couldn't leave this unanswered. The tension was unbearable. He went back to the living room and sat on the sofa, with his eyes fixed on the basement door. Time seemed to drag painfully, each second longer than the previous one. He tried calling his dad again, but once again got no answer. Lucas felt a lump forming in his throat. Suddenly, he heard the sound of the front door being unlocked and opened. The heavy steps of his father and Reese's cheerful voice echoed through the hallway. Lucas felt immediate relief, but also a new wave of dread. How could this be? He ran to meet them, his eyes wide with terror. His father looked at him with concern. "Lucas, what's happening? You look like you've seen a ghost." Reese, with his carefree expression, looked at his older brother and asked, "Why were you in the basement?" Lucas tried to explain, the words coming out in a rush. "I heard your voice, Reese. You were calling me, but I checked the whole house, and there was no one here." "What's going on?" Lucas's dad frowned. "We just got here, son. Reese was with me the whole time. It couldn't have been him." Lucas felt the ground open up beneath his feet. Something was terribly wrong, and he knew that whatever had imitated his brother's voice was still there, in the basement, waiting. Lucas's father exchanged a worried glance with him. "Maybe it was just the storm playing tricks on your mind, Lucas. Let's go upstairs and rest a bit. Tomorrow, everything will seem clearer." Lucas nodded slowly, but the feeling of unease didn't leave him. He followed his father and Reese into the kitchen, where his father started making some tea for everyone. Reese was distracted, playing with one of his toys on the floor, oblivious to the tension in the air. Lucas tried to calm himself, taking small sips of the hot tea. But the heavy silence of the house, combined with the relentless sound of the storm, continued to grow his discomfort. He knew he needed to talk more about what had happened. "Dad, I swear I heard Reese's voice in the basement. Twice. And it sounded so real, acquiesced trodwo para o ingles. Adaptida para manter, o suspense, e o terror corrector. Stikos des tipo de narrativa." Before his father could respond, a loud knock echoed from the basement door. Everyone froze, and Lucas's eyes widened with fear. "Dad, did you hear that?" he whispered. His father nodded, visibly alarmed. "Stay here. I'll check it out." He grabbed a flashlight and slowly approached the basement door, while Lucas and Reese clung to each other, their hearts pounding wildly. Lucas's dad opened the basement door and shone the flashlight down the stairs. "Is anyone there?" he called out, his voice firm but betraying a slight tremor. There was no answer. He began to descend slowly, the beam of light dancing on the walls. Lucas wanted to scream for his father to stop, but he was paralyzed with fear. He heard his father's steps echoing in the basement. Each second felt like an eternity. Finally, he heard his father's voice calling up from the basement. "It's okay. There's no one down here." Lucas and Reese sighed in relief, but Lucas was still not convinced. When his father returned, Lucas looked at him with worry. "Dad, something is very wrong. I can feel it." His father sighed and placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder. "Let's just stay together and try to rest. Tomorrow, we can think more clearly about this." They went upstairs, each preparing for bed. But Lucas knew he wouldn't be able to sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what was happening. The The sound of the storm continued outside, mirroring his tumultuous thoughts. Then, in the middle of the night, when the house was in absolute silence, Lucas heard it again. "Lucas, come here." Reese's voice, clearer and more insistent than ever, echoed down the hallway. Lucas got up, feeling a chill run down his spine. He opened his bedroom door and peered into the dark hallway. The voice seemed to be coming from the basement again, calling with an urgency he couldn't ignore. He knew his father and Reese were sleeping in the rooms next to his, but this voice couldn't be ignored. He walked down the hallway, each step echoing in the silence. He reached the top of the stairs leading to the basement and looked down. The darkness seemed even deeper, more oppressive. Lucas knew he was about to face something unknown, something beyond his comprehension. With his heart racing wildly, he began to descend the stairs, determined to uncover the truth. Each step felt like a challenge, fear tightening his chest. When he reached the bottom, the darkness seemed to close in around him. He called for his brother, his voice trembling. "Reese, is that you?" Silence was his only response until the voice sounded again, this time directly behind him. "Lucas, come here." Lucas turned abruptly, the flashlight shaking in his hand, illuminating an emptiness that seemed to mock him. He knew he wasn't alone, and this time there was no escaping the truth. Lucas turned slowly, the flashlight trembling in his hand. The beam of light danced on the walls, creating shadows that seemed to move independently. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Reese's voice, calling for him, still echoed through the basement. He took a step forward, the light illuminating the corner where he had heard the voice closest. And that's when he saw it. Reese's old toy, a red truck that he knew had been stored away for years, was there, in the middle of the basement floor. Lucas approached cautiously, bending down to pick up the toy. Holding the truck in his hands, Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. It was impossible for the toy to be there by chance. He began to question whether his mind was playing tricks on him, or if something truly inexplicable was happening. The basement, which had once been a refuge, now seemed to be a place filled with secrets and shadows. Suddenly, he heard soft footsteps above him, as if someone were walking on the upper floor. Lucas's heart raced even faster. He knew his father and Reese were sleeping, so who or what could be making those sounds? He turned off the flashlight, hoping the darkness would provide some form of protection. His entire body was on high alert, every sound amplified by the oppressive silence of the basement. Lucas took a deep breath and started up the stairs, holding the toy as if it were a protective amulet. When he reached the top, he opened the door slowly, peering through the crack. The upstairs was bathed in a silent gloom, but the footsteps continued, now clearly coming from Reese's room. With silent steps, Lucas made his way to his brother's room. He hesitated before pushing the door open gently. The room was lit only by the faint glow coming through the window, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Reese was in bed, breathing calmly, completely unaware of what was happening. Lucas felt a momentary relief at seeing his brother safe. However, the feeling of being watched didn't leave him. He looked around the room, searching for any sign of movement or something out of the ordinary. That's when he noticed something strange. The closet was slightly ajar, a thin line of darkness standing out in the gloom. He approached the closet slowly, each step making the floor creak slightly. When he was just a few inches away, he reached out a trembling hand and pulled the closet door open. What he saw made his blood run cold. Inside the closet, among the hanging clothes and stored toys, there was an empty space that shouldn't be there. A hole in the back wall, large enough for a person to pass through. Lucas had never noticed that hole before, and it certainly shouldn't have been there. The hole seemed to pulse with its own darkness, and Lucas felt an inexplicable force drawing him in. He knelt, trying to see what was on the other side. The darkness was deep and impenetrable, like a portal to another world. Then he heard it again. "Lucas, come here." Reese's voice, but this time coming clearly from the other side of the hole. Lucas backed away, his heart pounding. He knew his brother was in bed behind him. So who or what was calling to him from the other side? Lucas stood up quickly, closing the closet door with a bang. He needed to tell his father what he had found. He needed to understand what was happening. He ran to his father's room, waking him urgently. "Dad, there's something you need to see." His father, confused and sleepy, followed Lucas to Reese's room. When Lucas showed him the hole in the closet, his father went pale. "This wasn't here before," he muttered. "I've never seen this hole." The sense of terror was growing, and Lucas knew that this night was far from over. Something sinister was hiding in the darkness of the basement and the hole. Something that was calling him. Lucas's father stood there, staring at the hole in the back of the closet, his expression of concern turning into something darker. "This doesn't make any sense, Lucas. This hole. It was never here before." He looked at his son, the gravity of the situation reflected in his eyes. "We need to call the police." Lucas nodded, but he knew something needed to be done immediately. He couldn't just ignore that call. "Dad, I think I need to see what's on the other side. I need to understand what's happening." Lucas's father held his shoulder firmly. "No, you're not going. We don't know what this is. It could be dangerous." But Lucas saw the fear in his father's eyes, and it only increased his determination. He felt that he was the only one who could solve this mystery. Before his father could stop him, Lucas knelt again in front of the hole. He took a deep breath and began to crawl in, feeling the darkness envelop him. "Lucas, no." He heard his father shout, but it was too late. The invisible force drawing him in was irresistible. Lucas felt like he was crawling through a narrow tunnel, the air around him growing colder. His flashlight wavered, casting strange shadows on the walls. Finally, he emerged on the other side, in a space that seemed identical to his basement, but something was deeply wrong. The air was thick and cold, and the darkness seemed to pulse with its own life. He looked around, trying to find any sign of what was happening. And then he heard it again, clearer and closer than ever. "Lucas, come here." The voice came from a dark corner of the basement, where the flashlight barely reached. Lucas walked slowly in that direction, his fear and curiosity growing with each step. When he finally illuminated the corner, he saw something that made him recoil in horror. There, sitting in a corner, was Reese. But it wasn't the Reese he knew. The boy looked paler, his eyes lifeless, and a disturbing smile distorting his face. "Reese?" Lucas whispered, his voice trembling. "Come here, Lucas," said the figure with his brother's voice. "I need you here." Lucas knew, deep down, that this wasn't his brother. It was something using Reese's shape and voice to lure him in. He took a step back, trying to keep the flashlight steady. "You're not Reese," he said firmly. The figure rose slowly, the smile never leaving its face. "Why are you scared, brother?" "It's me, Reese. Come here." Lucas felt an intense cold running through his body. He needed to get out of there, but the pull toward the figure was almost irresistible. Summoning all the courage he had, he turned and ran back through the tunnel, feeling the darkness trying to grasp him. Equi est atrado e adaptao, du su rotero para o ingel es, emerged from the hole in the closet, his father quickly pulling him out. "Lucas, what happened?" his father asked, visibly shaken. "That's not Reese, Dad. That thing isn't him. We need to get out of here now." Lucas's voice was urgent, panic rising within him. Seeing the terror in his son's eyes, his father didn't hesitate any longer. He grabbed a still sleeping Reese, and together they hurried out of the house, feeling the oppressive presence of darkness following them. Once outside, under the torrential rain, Lucas looked back at the house, which now seemed like a strange and malevolent place. He knew the battle was far from over. Something had been awakened that night, something that wouldn't rest until it got what it wanted. And Lucas knew he would have to face this sinister entity again, sooner or later. The rain was pouring heavily, drenching Lucas, his father, and Reese as they ran to the car. The cold drops made Lucas shiver, but he knew the chill came more from the terror than the weather. His father placed Reese in the back seat, still asleep, and quickly got into the car. Lucas took one last look at the house, its grotesque shadows illuminated by the lightning. Then he got into the car and slammed the door shut. His father drove through the rain, the windshield wipers furiously working to keep the glass clear. "Where are we going?" Lucas asked, his voice low and tense. "To your aunt's house," his father replied, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "She lives close by, and it's a safe place. We need to figure out what to do." They arrived at the aunt's house quickly. She opened the door, surprised and worried by the expressions on her brothers' and nephews' faces. "What happened?" she asked, pulling them inside. Lucas's father quickly explained the situation while preparing hot chocolate and offering dry blankets. Lucas sat on the couch, his gaze distant, trying to process what he had seen. The vision of Reese, or whatever that thing in the basement, was still lingered in his mind. "Lucas, are you okay?" his aunt asked, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. He nodded slowly, but his mind was still in turmoil. "Aunt, what do you know about our house? Did anything happen there before we moved in?" His aunt frowned, thinking. "I remember hearing some stories, but I never paid much attention. They say the house has an old history, maybe even haunted. But those are just legends, you know?" "They're not just legends," Lucas said, his voice trembling. "I saw something that looked like Reese, but wasn't him. And there was a hole in the closet that led to a strange place." Lucas's father looked shaken, but determined. "We need to find out more about the house. We can't go back until we know what we're dealing with." His aunt nodded and went to fetch some old books she had in the house, collections of local stories and historical records. They spent the night researching, turning page after page, until they found something that caught Lucas's attention. An old newspaper reported the story of a family who lived in the house decades ago. The youngest son mysteriously disappeared and was never found. The family moved out shortly after, claiming the house was cursed. "Lucas," his father said, reading the story aloud. "This explains a lot. Maybe this entity is connected to the disappearance of that boy." The revelation left Lucas even more determined. "We need to find a way to get rid of this thing. We can't let it continue to haunt our family." His aunt, who was reading another book, suddenly looked up. "Here it says the house was built over an old Native American burial ground. Maybe there's some kind of trapped spirit or entity." Lucas felt a chill upon hearing this. That makes sense. We need help to deal with something like this. His father agreed. "We'll look for a specialist. Someone who understands spirits and curses." With the decision made, they spent the rest of the night in uneasy sleep, hoping the day would bring answers and help. The storm outside finally began to subside, But Lucas knew the real storm was yet to come. He needed to face what was in the house, uncover its origin, and find a way to protect his family. The next step would be crucial, and Lucas was prepared to do whatever it took to overcome the darkness that had invaded their lives. Morning brought a cold, gray light, filtered through the clouds still heavy in the sky. Lucas and his father, after a restless night, were ready to act. The aunt had managed to get in touch with a paranormal expert, a man named Dr. Marcus Delgado, known for his investigations of mysterious cases. They called Dr. Delgado, who agreed to meet them at the house. The specialist arrived early in the afternoon, bringing with him a suitcase full of equipment and old books. Delgado was a middle-aged man with a serious expression and eyes that seemed to see beyond the visible. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Lucas's father said, shaking Delgado's hand. "We're desperate to understand what's happening." Delgado nodded, observing the house with a look of curiosity and apprehension. "Let's go inside and take a look," he said, his voice deep and calm. "But before we start, I need you to tell me everything that has happened." Sitting in the living room, Lucas, his father, and his aunt recounted the events of the last few nights. Delgado listened attentively, taking notes in a notebook. When they finished, he got up and began preparing his equipment. "Based on what you described, it seems we are dealing with an entity tied to this house for a specific reason. The story of the Native American burial ground and the boy's disappearance in the past are important clues. We need to understand the nature of this entity and figure out how to free it or banish it." He placed a device on the table, explaining, "This is an electromagnetic field meter. It will help us detect any paranormal activity. I'll also use some night vision cameras and motion sensors to monitor the basement and Reese's room." Lucas felt a mix of fear and hope. "Do you think we can get rid of it?" Delgado looked at him seriously. "I'll do everything I can. But we face a tough challenge. Entities that cling to places like this usually have a strong reason for staying. We need to discover that reason." They began setting up the equipment, with Delgado instructing Lucas and his father on where to place each device. The house was eerily quiet, as if it were waiting for what was to come. When they finished, Delgado asked everyone to gather in the living room. "We're going to start the investigation in the basement," he said. "Lucas, you mentioned you heard your brother's voice coming from there. That suggests the entity might be trying to communicate something. Let's see if we can make contact." They descended to the basement, where the darkness seemed even more oppressive. Delgado lit a few candles and began preparing a protective circle on the floor. "This circle will protect us from any negative influence," he explained. "I'm going to try to contact the entity now. Stay inside the circle and remain calm." Delgado began speaking in a low tone, invoking spirits and asking the entity to reveal itself. The temperature in the basement dropped rapidly, and Lucas felt a shiver run down his spine. The electromagnetic field meter started beeping, indicating a strong presence. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the basement, the same voice Lucas had heard before. "Lucas, come here." The call was more insistent, more disturbing. Delgado remained calm, continuing his invocation. "Who are you?" Delgado asked, his voice firm. "Why are you here?" The darkness seemed to shift, and a figure began to form in the shadows. It was the image of the missing boy, his eyes empty and face distorted by deep sadness. "I'm trapped here," the figure said, his voice filled with despair. "I can't leave. He won't let me go." "Who is he?" Delgado asked, trying to maintain the communication. "He is the guardian," the boy replied. "He protects this place. He doesn't let anyone leave. You need to free my soul." Please help me." Delgado looked at Lucas and his father, his face pale. "We have a trapped soul here, held by a guardian. We need to learn more about this guardian and find a way to free the boy." The figure began to fade, and the temperature in the basement returned to normal. Delgado sighed, collecting his equipment. "This is just the beginning. We need to keep investigating and find a ritual that can free the trapped soul and banish the guardian." Lucas felt a new determination growing within him. He knew the battle was just beginning, but now he had hope that they could win. With Delgado's help, he was ready to face any challenge that came next, determined to free the house from the darkness that haunted it. With the information obtained in the basement, Delgado spent the following days researching rituals and methods of freeing trapped souls. Lucas and his father helped as much as they could, combing through old books and looking for any clues they could find about the guardian and the house's history. Finally, after several days of intense research, Delgado found an ancient ritual that seemed promising. He explained that the ritual involved creating a protective circle and invoking benevolent spirits to help free the trapped soul. With all the preparations made, they gathered once more at the house. Delgado conducted the ritual in the basement, where the presence of the missing boy was strongest. Lucas, his father, and his aunt watched with anticipation as the paranormal expert recited ancient words and lit candles around the protective circle. The atmosphere in the basement was charged with tension and anticipation. Lucas felt his heart racing as the ritual proceeded. He knew they were close to finding out if the guardian could be defeated and the boy's soul freed. Then something started to happen. The air around them seemed to vibrate with an unknown energy. The electromagnetic field meter began to beep, indicating a supernatural presence. Delgado continued his invocation, his voice resonating through the basement. Suddenly, a light shone in the center of the protective circle. A figure appeared, radiant and serene. It was an elderly woman with gentle eyes and a comforting smile. "Who are you?" Delgado asked, maintaining his concentration. The woman smiled. "I am a spirit guide, sent to help in the freeing of this trapped soul. The guardian will not allow him to leave without a fight, but we are here to help." Delgado nodded, understanding. "What do we need to do?" The woman explained the next step of the ritual, guiding them on how to channel the energy of the protective circle to weaken the guardian and allow the boy's soul to be freed. It was a dangerous task, but necessary. With renewed determination, they followed the spirit guide's instructions. Delgado and Lucas focused their energy on the protective circle, while the woman channeled her spiritual abilities to weaken the guardian. The spiritual battle that ensued was intense. The basement seemed to vibrate with energy, and Lucas felt an overwhelming pressure in his chest. But they persevered, staying firm in their goal of freeing the trapped soul. Then, finally, the guardian began to weaken. His presence in the basement diminished, and the figure of the missing boy began to glow with a golden light. With one last combined effort, they broke the chains holding the soul captive. The basement was filled with a sense of peace and relief. The oppressive energy that once dominated the space dissipated, replaced by a comforting calm. Delgado smiled, looking at Lucas and his father. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "The boy's soul has been freed. The guardian has been banished." Lucas felt a weight lifted from his shoulders. At last, the house was free from the darkness that haunted it. He looked at the basement, now bathed in light, and knew they had done the right thing. They embraced, celebrating their victory against the dark forces that threatened their family. Lucas knew the battle might be over, but the journey was far from finished. They faced the future with courage and determination, ready for any challenge that came their way. Are you ready to explore the mysteries of the human mind? Join us and subscribe to our channel now to uncover deep insights into psychology, human behavior, and much more. Unravel the secrets of the mind and embark on a journey of self-discovery and personal growth. Don't miss this opportunity to expand your understanding of the world around you. Subscribe today and take the first step towards a more conscious and meaningful life.